From the sports betting capital of the world, Las Vegas, it's time for the show you can't afford to miss. The #1 weekly football preview, Wanna Bet. Get ready for valuable information, analysis, winning picks, and betting strategies. Your hosts, SEC gridiron guru Kip Keefer, and award-winning betting expert, writer, and sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun, Kip Keefer. Let's go. Here's everything you need to win big. Wanna Bet.
Welcome, everybody. It's Wanna Bet Week 2. Kip Keefer, Case Keefer from the fabulous Las Vegas Strip and the TI Treasure Island Resort. We are in the Golden Circle Race and Sportsbook, bringing you the program, talking about all aspects of college football, pro football, and particularly the emphasis on the betting angle. We want this to be the ultimate winning season for you. Case, you're the sports editor of the Las Vegas Sun. We are going to have some fascinating discussions over the next couple of months on all aspects of sports betting. But today, the dominant story, it's Labor Day weekend. College football is back in full force.
Yeah, it's so exciting right now. You know, had a couple games to get warmed up last week, but having a full betting board, basically everyone in action, some big-time games to look forward to. This is what it's all about. I love the week where college football kind of gets to take center stage. I will say here in Las Vegas, at least the NFL is still king. It does a little bit bigger handle. The crowds will be a little bit bigger, but it's nice to have one weekend where it is college football's time to shine. Yeah,
because next week we'll focus on the NFL kicking off their season. There's some great matchups, some great games this week to get us started. From the overall perspective, from a betting standpoint here in Las Vegas, I have a horse racing background, so it looks like they think the top three, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, are basically Secretariat, American Pharaoh, and Man of War, and everybody else is a three-legged plug. It's funny how that disparity, because it's a pretty big gap to Clemson, who's in the 4 spot.
Yeah, for sure. It is those top three. I always caution, things don't usually turn out as easy as they look, but man, this one does look easy. It's hard to see Ohio State getting beat. Then Georgia and Alabama, they're going to be double-digit favorites in every game almost, it looks like. So those three teams, I think it's a pretty fair for them to be way above everyone else in the futures market. It's tough to pick against either of them. I think where a bettor can really find value is you need to decide who is going to be your number 4 team. Who's the team? Because look, the college football playoff is going to have 4 regardless. If you can find that right number 4 team and place a future bet on them, you can even hedge out of it. You can kind of make money as long as they make the playoff. There's some intriguing candidates. Like you said, Clemson is the next team. I think they're most commonly 10-1. If you can find a 12-1, they might be interesting. It's a hard burden to put on anyone, but they are the closest thing coming back to, I think, what this Georgia defense was last year. What they have up front, it's just an embarrassment of riches. You have to go back 2 years ago, but we've seen DJ Uiagalelei be the guy at quarterback. He struggled last year, but there's some positive reports. If he can get back, you got to decide, was last year an aberration, or was it a sign of things to come for Clemson? If you think it was an aberration, I don't necessarily hate backing them. They have an easy schedule. Maybe Clemson is that team. Even if Uiagalelei fails, they have a 5-star quarterback waiting in the wings behind him, Cade Klubnik. But maybe it's not Clemson. Maybe it's another team. A team I'm really high on from a personnel perspective is USC. Way back in January, I bet them at 50-1 to win the national championship. I know they have a history of underperforming, underachieving, but I think Lincoln Riley really should take the Pac-12 by storm. A little tough with their schedule. They have about as tough of a schedule as you can have in the Pac-12. USC, they're now 25-1 to win the national championship, which is kind of borderline to me. I don't love that. And the Big 12 really wide open with, of course, going back to Lincoln Riley leaving. Maybe you find a team in the Big 12, but I think that's really important as a bettor. Find that team that you think can be the number 4. I think that's where there could be value in the futures market.
Looking at matchups this first weekend, I mean, from a basic rule of thumb, we haven't even seen these teams actually in their current form play yet. Is there kind of a rule of thumb, or are you better off maybe taking some of the bigger point totals on some underdogs because these teams are sight unseen than laying a bunch of points with a big favorite?
Yeah, I think it's all very situational. It depends on the game, but this is why I love early in the season, especially in college football. handicapping at this time really is more of an art than a science for the first few weeks. It comes down to how you value, where the pieces fill, how you value these coaches, how you think they're going to look, because, there's a lot of numbers, and you got to just figure out how to interpret them. The further we get into the season, you're going to have a pretty good sample size of how these teams are playing, and it's more a race to get the better numbers, I feel like, to the people that are doing this seriously. You're all working on the same stuff. Here early in the season, everyone just has different assumptions. You've all come to different conclusions. So I think it really depends on the team. You can find some great value with huge underdogs if you think that, they're going to be better than they were last year. But, it can go the opposite way, too. If you think, a team's really going to plummet and crash, it's worth it to back some of those big favorites, too. So it really comes down to the individual game. But, I just love that it's so open for interpretation. We don't really have any surefire answers yet, and that's what makes it so fun.
New coaches have made a big impact in the SEC in recent years. We've got a couple of high-level hires this year in Billy Napier at Florida and Brian Kelly at LSU.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what comes out of this. I feel like I'm a little worried about this, especially in even the markets going against me, but I'm a little higher on Brian Kelly and LSU than I think most people are. I know it was fun to make fun of him for all the ridiculous stuff he put out this offseason, but I think he really crushed the portal, as I might have mentioned last week. Maybe it's going to take a year, but I think the SEC West is pretty wide open beyond the top spot. I think LSU could be in that mix. Napier, I'm kind of a little more worried about. They seem to me like the most erratic team. They could be great right away, or they could be poor. I think from an actual coaching perspective, he kind of went downhill at Louisiana. He was more aggressive when he first came in. I really thought he was a great candidate. Then when he got his talent in, he kind of got a little more conservative. I didn't love some of his play calling the last couple of years. He's begging for patience. He said it multiple times. That's kind of a red flag to me. So I'm slightly selling on Florida this year if you're going to nail me down. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if Anthony Richardson has a great year and they're great. I see a lot of fluctuation with them, but I would say in general I'm higher on LSU and lower on Florida.
You do a column every week for the Las Vegas Sun where you analyze and pick every single college game. That's got to be a monumental task.
Yeah, I mean, it takes up basically a whole Monday. I'll just be chained to my desk for a while working on nothing else. But it really comes back to what you do, going into the season, the last several months, looking over every team, looking at what they did last year, who they have coming in, who they have coming out, what different projection systems say about them. So I think the hardest work is going into the season, and then you just got to stay on your toes and adjust from there week to week.
Well, I'm really looking forward to the next segment of the show today. It's the first set of real picks for a weekly slate of games. We'll see which direction Case goes. In subsequent weeks, Case will be giving you his top college and his NFL knowledge. And once again, as I mentioned in the open, we will be focusing on opening week for the NFL next week. The college situation is going to be great. I can't wait to see all the games. I'm going to focus during the season on just the SEC since that's kind of in my wheelhouse. And there's just so many fascinating storylines because in just the last 15 or 20 seconds we have here, some new coaches last year made big impacts. And really interesting, Spencer Rattler, the failed Heisman candidate, is at South Carolina now in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, 6-1, I think going into last year, the favorite to win the Heisman, now like 100-1.
Wow.
I think it's kind of an overreaction to some struggles last year. He was still pretty good. I don't know what to do with South Carolina because I think they overachieved last year. They would be a team I would be down on in most cases, but they're bringing in so much new talent. Is it even fair to judge them based on last season? I don't know what to do with South Carolina, but they could surprise. I would be willing to buy low on Spencer Rattler. I still think he's a heck of a player.
It's going to be so much fun, and we're going to find out how Case is going to start the season, so don't go anywhere. His picks coming up next.
Hey, it's Case Keefer back again for another edition of My Best Bets. Week 1 didn't go so poorly. Went 2-1 with my picks in this segment. Of course, the one loss was the biggest bet, my favorite position with Nebraska. Just goes to show, don't trust Scott Frost. But hey, it's a long season, long way to go. Looking forward to piecing together some more winning weeks. I know earlier on the show today we talked a lot about identifying value, finding what to play on the board, and kind of inside my process. And I thought one of the marquee Saturday games of Week 1 could offer a unique glimpse in how I go about things. So we'll start with that one. I'm talking about Utah's trip to take on Florida, and I ended up betting the Gators at plus 130 on the money line to win outright. in this spot. And how I arrived at that is when I made the number on this game, I believed it should be a pick-em. I think you have to give Utah the overall edge as a very slightly better team just based on what they did last year. They're more proven. However, from a personnel standpoint, there's not that much separating these two teams. Florida, although they've dipped a little bit, still recruits at a high level, still has some talent there, even in Billy Napier's first year, especially up front. I don't see any way they're going to be outmanned by Utah, and this is no small home field advantage getting to play at the Swamp under a new coach. Utah's not exactly sure how to scout exactly what everything's going to look like under Napier. Florida, on the other hand, gets to stay at home, has a good idea of what Utah wants to do after their successful year last year. So I thought Pick'em was fair, and that's exactly where it opened here in Las Vegas at the shop that takes the best limits in May. However, all the hype on Utah has pushed this all the way out to 3. Utah is a 3-point favorite here at the time of recording, and I think that's just a little too much. But the reason why I ultimately ended up going with the money line instead of the point spread is you got to know the value of the 3-point move. A 3-point move from, say, -4 to -7 is a lot bigger than one from Pick'em to -3. Not a whole lot of games land on 1 or 2. 3 is the most common margin of victory in college football, but it's diminishing year after year with higher scoring games. This game, I think, is totaled at 51, which, is still higher than traditional in college football, not high any in this day and age. But you look at the value of that points, and going from a pick-em at -110 both sides to +130 on Florida, that's about a 9.5% move as far as probability, which is all point spreads are at the end of the day, is the probability of winning. So I really think +130 is a better bet if you do the math. I know I might have lost some people there with that, but the bottom line is I think the money line is a better bet all the way down to +120. I would probably take the 3 over +120. This is not guaranteed to work out in this one occasion. Yes, it can bite you sometimes, but if you want to be a long-term winning gambler, you need to get familiar with these types of numbers, and you need to be deciding kind of based on what's going to bring you a better expected value. And in this case, I think +130 is a better bet than taking the +3. So we're going to go with Florida outright. I like Utah, but I think it's just gone a little too crazy with how people are throwing them in the playoff. I don't understand how you can be a dark horse playoff candidate when now all of a sudden everyone is calling you a college football playoff competitor. And that's what week 1's all for. It's about for taking your positions on teams that you think are better or worse than the market. So I'm going to run through, I got 4 other games here that touch on some of that same stuff. This one on the other end of the spectrum, Arizona was terrible last year, but for some reason, people seem to be counting on a bounce back from them this year, thinking they're going to be a little good. I've heard a lot of hype for Jed Fish. People like him as a second-year coach. I'm not so sold. I thought strategically he made some blunders last year. I think especially up front, this Arizona team is still undermanned. So I'm going to lay 6 with San Diego State. The Aztecs notoriously never have a quarterback. Maybe this year Braxton Burmeister solves that. Hopefully it's not just a curse where they don't get anything. But I like San Diego State -6. I would play that to 7. Maybe a little bit of an overreaction to week 1. North Carolina struggled, at least in the first half, with Florida A&M, despite Florida A&M almost not even playing the game, having an undermanned roster. And that pushed this point spread from North Carolina -3, I saw over the summer. They were all the way at +1 earlier in the week. I took North Carolina at some even money on the money line and +1. Now they're a 1-point favorite, but like I already said, the move from +1 to -1, that's not huge. You basically just have to pick the winner. So I still think North Carolina safe to play at -1. They are taking on Appalachian State. Probably should have said that sooner. I like App State. They're a tough team. Could win the Sun Belt this year, but I'm pretty high on North Carolina as well. They have some really great skill players, Josh Downs especially. I think they're going to have a much sharper performance here in their second game. Trying to span all kinds of different conferences. How about Southern Miss +4? I think it's unfair to judge Will Hall based on what happened in his first year last year. They had so many quarterback injuries. Basically every quarterback on the roster got hurt at one point. They have a lot coming back this year, whereas Liberty, who they're taking on, has a lot more turnover. Malik Willis was just electric last year and has been electric again for the Titans in the preseason. I think maybe he didn't even get enough buzz for what he did last year. I think it's a little bit of a rebuilding for Liberty. I'll gladly take the 4 points with the Golden Eagles. And then to get to a primetime game, I think Kip will be covering LSU, Florida State on Sunday. But how about Monday, Clemson and Georgia Tech? I think a big inflection point of this college football season is where you think of Clemson. Do you think they're going to bounce back and get back to the power they had been for the last half decade? Or do you think these offensive woes, the coordinator turnover is going to doom them for another year. I am more towards the former. But this bet doesn't even really have much to do with that. It has a lot to do with fading Georgia Tech, their first opponent, who I think was just really gutted by the transfer portal. I think Jeff Collins is in really a desperation mode right now, and I don't think that's conducive to good results. I bet Clemson when they were minus 21. Unfortunately, that's gone. There's still some minus 22, I think even minus 21.5 left on the board. I still think, I know you're going to be betting the standalone game on Monday, and I think anything up to 24, where I think this eventually closes, I think Clemson is the play. The Tigers' defense is going to be suffocating. I don't see Georgia Tech scoring many points on this. On one last bet I wanted to throw in away from the college football realm, but hey, I broke down the Heisman last week, gave out some Heisman plays, so why not do the NFL equivalent as a future play for this week on Wanna Bet? And there's an MVP bet I absolutely love. That is Kansas City Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes at 10-1 to win the MVP. I bet this a few months ago. You could find out where on LasVegasSun.com. I wrote a story about it as soon as I did it. I just think Mahomes is clearly the best player in the NFL. I think a couple years ago you would never think to see him at 10-1 as an MVP. A lot of times it's hard for a guy to win it twice, even though we just saw it with Aaron Rodgers, because they have to at least match, if not better, the numbers from the first time they won it, which is against Mahomes generally, but I don't think that's the case here because of all the Chiefs lost, of course headlined by Tyreek Hill, all the talent they have coming into their division. I think honestly if Mahomes just kind of stays with his career baselines, which I think he's going to be able to do, and if the Chiefs win the division and what's being called the best division in NFL history potentially, I think he's going to get a ton of credit. I thought the 10-1 would be long gone by now, but it's popped back up at several sports books. I really like Patrick Mahomes at 10-1 to win the NFL MVP. Can't wait to talk more NFL next week, but until then, let's go to Kip. Stay tuned for his SEC plays this week.
Hey everybody, Kip Keefer ready to bring you up to date on what we like in the SEC. Opening weekend, it's going to be great. Some really intriguing games, I thought, in the SEC this week. As far as intersectional matchups, some more attractive games than we normally see. Of course, you always have the garden variety, made-for-TV kind of kickoff classic games. And we have that with Georgia and Oregon, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But I like the intersectional aspects of this weekend with big games. And it's funny because if you didn't already know it, a lot of these college programs schedule opponents well in advance, 4, 5, 6 years out. And it's kind of like a really bad gotcha when one of those teams that you scheduled that you figure would be a pretty non-rigid opener in those couple succeeding years becomes a powerhouse kind of team. And that's what's facing Florida and Arkansas both this week. I'm not going to give you a pick on either game because I'm conflicted. I like both the SEC teams' circumstances that they're at home, but I think they're playing a little bit more talented opponents. That's certainly the case in the Florida-Utah game. New regime, of course, down in Gainesville with Billy Napier and all the changes he's made. And he's got the best player on the field in Anthony Richardson, who might have a monster season for the Gators. But Utah's a really solid team. They won the Pac-12 last year. They beat Oregon twice in 3 weeks to do that, and then gave Ohio State fits in the bowl game, of course, losing at the end, but one of the most entertaining games of last year's bowl season. So I think Utah has better personnel, but Florida has all of the intangibles playing in the swamp and a lot of excitement with the new coach and the new regime. So we're going to stay away from that one. Also, Cincinnati, who was in the Final Four last year, the college football playoff. Of course, Alabama pretty much showed that they didn't really belong there, but after all, who did? Because Georgia did the same thing to Michigan in their semifinal game. Georgia and Alabama head and shoulders above everybody else last year. But Cincinnati take nothing away from the Bearcats. Remember, their big road win last year was at Notre Dame, a game they had to win to make their dreams come true, and they beat the Irish handily in South Bend, which was a very impressive accomplishment. So that game's tough. 6.5-point favorite for Arkansas. I told you last week on the over-under wins total for the year, I just think Arkansas is going to be about a 500 team. I think the schedule is just too tough. Not only the SEC West, but
this game and a trip later in the middle of the season, inexplicably, to Provo, Utah to play BYU. That's not a good non-conference matchup, particularly right in the heart of the SEC schedule. So anyway, I lean in this game Cincinnati and take the 6.5, but I'm not going to make that as one of my final 3 plays that I'm getting ready to give you. One of them, of course, is one of the plays, Roll Tide, Alabama, opening up in Tuscaloosa. They are, as I mentioned, usually on that big stage playing some major intersectional opponent. This year it's Utah State. But before you completely dismiss the Aggies, make note that this is an 11-win team from a year ago who shockingly won the Mountain West Conference. They were picked at the very bottom preseason and put together just a fantastic year. That's the good news. The bad news for the Aggies, in addition to coming to Tuscaloosa to play number 1 Alabama, is that they lost a lot of players off that team last year, including their quarterback. They did already play a game, if you're not aware. Last week, week 0, at home, Utah State hosted UConn, Connecticut, who has been really one of the worst programs in the country for the last 4 or 5 years. They were a big favorite in that game, and they did win 31-20, but they did not cover the spread in their home opener. So it's good to have a game under your belt. Performance against a not-so-good team at home could be an indicator that the Aggies are a little bit undermanned this year compared to the dream season they had a year ago. That being said, Alabama's 42-point favorites. And, man, that's a lot of points. 42 points against a team that won 11 games and their conference last year. This is not New Mexico State coming in. This is a team that actually had some accomplishment. I can't give up 42. I think Alabama wins the game handily, but I think Nick Saban is going to use it as much as a laboratory experiment for some new personnel and some new approaches. I think the game's going to be in the range of 45-10, which would make Utah State a cover. So our first play, take Utah State plus 42. Alabama wins, but I don't think they cover that number. Let's make our next stop over in Starkville, as Mississippi State, who a lot of people are really high on. I am not in that camp. I know they're going to score a lot of points. They're going to run the wide open offense, the air raid that characterizes their coach. But I've seen a couple of accounts where people are high on their defense, and I'll believe it when I see it. I thought the defense was kind of leaky at the end of last year. Memphis is not a team that's well coached, but always has some dangerous weapons on their team, and they've got some offensive power. They're getting 16 at Starkville. I think Mississippi State once again wins the game. But I think Memphis keeps it close long enough and can score enough where they'll cover that number. So take the points. Memphis plus 16 against Mississippi State. And the other game is on Sunday night. That'll be interesting. As Florida State, Mike Norvell trying to revive the once proud Seminole program. They go into LSU and play Brian Kelly and the LSU Tigers. This will be his debut. A lot of people are very interested to see just what LSU looks like. Kelly has gone down there and got that ship organized and hopefully well running if you're a Tiger fan. And but the big keys is they have 2 fantastic offensive players in transfer quarterback Jaden Daniels from Arizona State, throwing to Kayshon Boutte, who is my sleeper to be a Heisman Trophy candidate. This guy is one of the best receivers, best football players in the whole country. So I like LSU. Give the 3. I don't know why the line is that low. Florida State already played a game against Duquesne, if you can believe that, and got a win at home. But I think LSU debuts successfully under Brian Kelly with a win. Georgia-Oregon's another interesting game. Lots of great stuff in the SEC this week. We can't wait to tee it up and kick it off. Hope you have a good week and cash on all 3 of our games.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week on Wanna Bet. Want to thank Case Keefer for all of his expertise, and Clay Keefer, producer and director of the show. We will be back next week with more information that you can use to be a winner. In the meantime, I hope all of your plays this weekend are successful ones.
You've been watching Birmingham's only betting show, Wanna Bet, with your host Kip Keefer and the wise guy from the desert, the award-winning betting expert, writer and sports editor for the Las Vegas Sun, Case Keefer. Join us next week for betting tips and expert picks. Wanna Bet, Saturdays and every Saturday through football season on WTTO Channel 21 at 11:30.